In this episode, we dive into the most horrifying snake attacks ever recorded. From a man who got attacked by his own beloved snake to a woman who was eaten by a python in her apartment. June 2nd, 2015 was already hot by mid-morning in the rural outskirts of Ocala, Florida. The cicadas had started early, buzzing through the palmettos, and the air inside the single-story home on Lake Eaton Road was thick with humidity and the faint, sour scent of reptile musk. Windows were shut tight, blankets had been tacked over them to block sunlight. Inside, the rooms were dim and cramped, lined wall-to-wall with stacked terrariums, mismatched heat lamps, and makeshift shelving covered in feeding charts, molted skins, and empty syringes. The man who lived there was 61-year-old Carl Dempsey, and he hadn't let an inspector through that door in over a decade. But that morning, something would finally get out, and help would come too late. Carl had once worked in landscaping, but after an injury in his late 40s, he withdrew from most public life. He sold his equipment, stopped answering phone calls from extended family, and poured everything into his true passion: snakes. Reticulated pythons, gaboon vipers, timber rattlesnakes, corn snakes. He didn't just keep them, he bred them, traded them, studied them obsessively. Most were acquired through back channels, online forums, private dealers, message boards, where exotic reptile owners swapped advice, photos, and the occasional illegal specimen. Florida's laws had changed in 2010, tightening restrictions on venomous snakes and requiring permits for certain species. Carl had ignored them. He stopped renewing licenses, refused to register new additions, and ranted online about government overreach. In the tight-knit world of underground herpetology, he was known as a purist, someone who believed in personal responsibility over regulation. He didn't see it as dangerous, he saw it as freedom. On that Tuesday, one of Carl's few in-person friends, 44-year-old Dave Holbrook, arrived for a visit. The two had met years earlier on a reptile enthusiast message board and bonded over a shared love of rare species. Dave didn't keep venomous snakes himself, but he admired Carl's collection, and Carl loved showing it off. That morning, after coffee and a half-hearted discussion about caging upgrades, Carl led Dave into the back room where the real show began. He opened the lid of a glass enclosure and reached inside. Coiled beneath a fake log was a West African bush viper, small, iridescent, and deceptively calm. Its emerald green scales shimmered under the red heat lamp, and for a moment the snake didn't move. Carl extended his hand confidently, intending to guide it out with a hook, but opted instead for his usual bare hand method. As his fingers hovered over the coils, the viper lashed out. It struck faster than either man could register. The motion was so fast, so fluid, that it was almost over before it began. Just a flash of movement and the sharp pop of fangs breaking skin. The snake latched onto the knuckle of Carl's left index finger and held it for nearly 2 seconds, jaws clamped tight, before retreating back into the shadows of the enclosure. Carl recoiled instantly, swearing, blood running down the side of his hand. The bite marks were clean but deep, 2 dark punctures already beginning to swell. He squeezed the wound, cursing again, and tried to laugh it off, waving away Dave's concern. But Dave had seen the strike. He knew enough about venomous snakes to recognize what they were dealing with, and it wasn't a dry bite. Within minutes, Carl's hand began to change. The skin around the bite turned red, then purple, then nearly black. His fingers stiffened, curling involuntarily, and the veins in his wrist bulged beneath the surface. Dave hovered anxiously, urging him to call for help, but Carl refused, shaking his head and stumbling to the kitchen to grab his makeshift first aid supplies. His attempt to treat the bite was crude. He rinsed the wound under cold water, applied antibiotic ointment, and wrapped it in gauze that quickly soaked through with blood. He had no antivenom, few private keepers did, and even fewer had the legal ability to store or administer it. Instead, he downed 2 Benadryl tablets and poured himself half a glass of whiskey, muttering that it would all blow over. But it didn't. By the 40-minute mark, the swelling had spread past his elbow. His breathing grew shallow and sweat beaded on his forehead as his body temperature began to drop. He vomited twice, collapsing onto the floor and groaning in pain. His vision blurred, and when he tried to sit up, he collapsed again, this time harder. His hand, now 3 times its normal size, had turned nearly blue. Dave begged him to let him call 911, but Carl grew angry, panicked in a way Dave hadn't seen before. He muttered about the state taking his snakes, about raids and citations, about everything he'd built being destroyed. He said it wasn't worth it. He said he just needed to rest. And then he passed out. Right there on the linoleum floor, his arm grotesquely swollen and leaking blood through the gauze. His lips had turned pale, his breathing was ragged, shallow, and spaced unevenly. At 3:40 p.m., after watching Carl seize violently and lose consciousness again, Dave finally picked up the phone and made the call, ignoring his friend's warnings and deciding that saving his life mattered more than protecting his illegal hobby. Paramedics arrived 9 minutes later, forced to enter through the back door when no one answered. They found Carl on the living room floor, unresponsive, his arm mottled and swollen nearly to the shoulder. He was barely breathing. They attempted resuscitation on site and administered epinephrine and fluids. But by the time the ambulance reached the hospital, Carl had gone into full cardiac arrest. He was pronounced dead at 4:32 p.m. Inside the home, first responders found over 70 snakes, several venomous, most improperly housed, and none legally documented. Animal control officers were called in to begin the process of identifying and removing the reptiles. Some were euthanized on the spot, others were transferred to wildlife sanctuaries and research centers. The entire house was deemed a biohazard. Carl's collection, his obsession, was dismantled within 48 hours. There was no funeral, no obituary. Dave provided a statement to authorities and quietly deleted his forum accounts a few weeks later. Online, in the darker corners of the reptile community, a few posts appeared mourning Carl's death. Others called him a martyr, someone who had died for the freedom to keep what he loved. But outside that world, the story was simple. A man ignored the law. He kept dangerous animals in secret, and when one of them bit him, he refused the help that could have saved his life. Not because there wasn't time, not because help didn't come, but because he didn't want anyone to know. August 3rd, 2019. The northwestern edge of Houston, Texas was experiencing one of the most severe summer droughts in recent memory. The once flowing creeks that sustained local wildlife had dried to dusty channels, forcing animals to venture deeper into suburban areas in search of water and food. The Melrose family's neighborhood sat precariously on this urban wilderness boundary, with undeveloped woodlots and green belts providing perfect corridors for wildlife to infiltrate residential areas. The Melrose family had moved to this quiet suburban development just 6 months earlier, attracted by the spacious yards and proximity to nature. Their backyard backed up against one of these wooded areas, which they initially saw as a feature rather than a threat. 4-year-old Jordan was a curious, energetic boy who loved exploring the outdoors. His parents had installed a swing set and sandbox where he spent hours playing, always under the watchful eye of his mother or father. In the weeks leading up to that fateful Saturday, residents had reported increased coyote sightings in the neighborhood. Local wildlife officials had issued warnings about keeping small pets indoors and securing trash cans, but no aggressive encounters had been reported. The drought had made these normally shy animals bolder in their search for food and water, but they typically avoided human contact. That evening, as the Texas heat began to subside with the setting sun, the Melrose family was enjoying a typical weekend at home. Jordan's mother was preparing dinner, occasionally checking on her son through the kitchen window as he played with his toys in the backyard. Jordan's father had gone to pick up some groceries, leaving mother and son at home. The family's small dog Pepper was inside the house, barking occasionally at something unseen beyond the fence. What the family didn't realize was that a young male coyote had been frequenting their neighborhood for weeks. Unlike most of its kind, this particular animal had become habituated to human presence through inadvertent feeding. Neighbors had left pet food outside, and unsecured garbage had provided easy meals. Wildlife biologists would later suspect the animal might have been suffering from an early stage of rabies, explaining its uncharacteristically bold behavior. At approximately 6:45 in the evening, Jordan's mother stepped away from the window briefly to answer a phone call. She could still hear her son talking to himself as he played, a reassuring sound that suddenly transformed into a terrified scream. Dropping the phone, she rushed to the back door. The coyote had slipped through a small gap in the fence where it met the ground near the wooded area. Initially, it had approached cautiously, perhaps drawn by the child's small stature and rapid movements, which triggered its predatory instinct. When Jordan spotted the animal and tried to run toward the house, the coyote lunged forward, knocking the boy to the ground. By the time Jordan's mother reached the yard, the coyote had bitten her son multiple times on his arms and neck. The animal, startled by the mother's screams and approach, backed away momentarily but didn't flee. Instead, it circled aggressively, showing none of the fear of humans typical of healthy coyotes. The mother grabbed a nearby garden tool and swung it wildly at the animal, finally driving it back toward the fence gap. As the coyote retreated, the mother scooped up her severely injured son and ran inside, locking the door behind them. Blood soaked through Jordan's t-shirt from multiple puncture wounds. She immediately called 911, desperately trying to stop the bleeding while waiting for emergency services to arrive. Paramedics reached the home within minutes, but Jordan had already lost a dangerous amount of blood from a bite that severed his carotid artery. Despite their best efforts to stabilize him during the rush journey to the hospital, the 4-year-old was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at the emergency room. The community was stunned by the tragedy. Wildlife officials set traps in the area and within 2 days captured a visibly unhealthy male coyote matching the mother's description. Testing confirmed the animal was in the early stages of rabies, explaining its abnormally aggressive behavior. The incident was classified as an extraordinarily rare predatory attack, one of only a handful of fatal coyote incidents ever recorded in North America. In the aftermath, the neighborhood underwent significant changes. The Homeowners Association implemented new fencing requirements, ensuring no gaps existed that could allow wildlife to enter yards. The city launched an aggressive wildlife management program and educational campaign about safely coexisting with urban wildlife. Residents were instructed never to feed wildlife even inadvertently, and to report any animals showing unusual behavior immediately. For the Melrose family, no measure could undo their loss. They eventually relocated, unable to remain in a home haunted by such tragedy. A small memorial garden was planted in the neighborhood park, where a plaque bearing Jordan's name reminds residents of the rare but real dangers that can emerge when human development encroaches on wildlife habitat, and of a little boy whose life was cut tragically short by an extraordinary confluence of unfortunate circumstances. The incident stands as a sobering reminder that while fatal wildlife attacks in urban settings are extremely rare, the combination of drought, habitat loss, and habituation to humans can occasionally lead to devastating consequences, forever changing the lives of those involved. Jordan's story reminds us that even suburban fences can't always keep nature at bay. June 17, 2011. The outskirts of Johannesburg, South Africa were shrouded in darkness. The Soweto township, with its densely packed homes and narrow streets, was just beginning to stir. Drought had plagued the region for months, turning the once lush landscape into parched earth. Extensive deforestation near Krugersdorp had devastated natural habitats, pushing desperate wildlife closer to human settlements than ever before. Malcolm Tuwani, a 52-year-old taxi driver, was returning home after a grueling 12-hour night shift. A respected figure in his community, Malcolm had driven taxis for over 20 years, navigating the complex streets of Johannesburg with an expertise that earned him loyal customers. His eldest son had just started university, a source of immense pride for Malcolm, who had sacrificed much to provide educational opportunities for his children. That fateful morning, he parked his white Toyota sedan on the street as usual, just 50 meters from his modest brick home. The streetlights cast elongated shadows as he gathered his belongings and began the short walk to his gate. Unknown to Malcolm, the environmental pressures had pushed a leopard into the urban edges of Johannesburg. Leopards, highly adaptable and naturally nocturnal, had begun targeting stray dogs and goats in the township. Several residents had reported missing pets and unusual sounds in the night, but authorities had dismissed these as routine urban problems rather than signs of a dangerous predator. Leopards are Africa's most adaptable big cats, capable of surviving in diverse environments from mountains to urban fringes. Unlike lions, they hunt alone and rely on stealth rather than speed. A fully grown male leopard typically weighs between 60 and 70 kilograms and possesses jaw strength powerful enough to drag prey twice its own weight up into trees. Their rosette-spotted coats provide excellent camouflage, allowing them to disappear against dappled light and shadow, even in urban environments where walls and drainage ditches offer hiding places. As Malcolm approached his gate at approximately 4:30 in the morning, the leopard was crouched behind a low concrete wall adjacent to his property. When Malcolm passed within striking distance, the leopard launched itself at him. The attack was silent and lightning fast, giving Malcolm no chance to react or defend himself. The leopard's jaws clamped onto Malcolm's neck, its canines puncturing vital blood vessels. The bite delivered approximately 300 to 500 pounds of pressure per square inch, causing immediate and severe damage. Malcolm had no time to call for help as the leopard's weight drove him into the ground. His body slammed against the dirt road, the impact causing severe additional trauma. The leopard's front claws dug into Malcolm's shoulder for stability, penetrating through his jacket. Neighbors heard the commotion but mistook the sounds for a robbery, a common occurrence in the area. No one ventured outside to investigate. The leopard maintained its grip on Malcolm's neck, ensuring its prey was immobilized. Blood pooled beneath Malcolm's body as the predator began to drag him toward a nearby drainage ditch, following the instinctive behavior to secure its kill. The leopard's claws tore through Malcolm's clothing and lacerated his back as it dragged him approximately 15 meters across the rough terrain. By this point, Malcolm had lost consciousness from blood loss and trauma. His body was limp as the leopard attempted to pull him into the narrow concrete drainage channel. A passing delivery truck's headlights illuminated the scene, startling the leopard and causing it to retreat into the shadows. The driver spotted Malcolm's body and immediately alerted authorities. But by the time emergency services arrived, Malcolm had already died from blood loss and traumatic injuries. The official time of death was recorded as 4:47 in the morning. In the aftermath, wildlife authorities launched a search for the leopard, setting traps throughout the township. 3 days later, they captured a male leopard approximately 2 kilometers from the attack site. DNA testing confirmed it was responsible for Malcolm's death. The incident sparked concern in the community and raised questions about urban wildlife management during environmental crises. Malcolm's family received compensation from the local government, though they claimed that officials had ignored previous warnings about predator sightings in residential areas. October 12, 2015. Lake Tahoe, California. The serene mountain landscape was ablaze with autumn colors as temperatures dropped across the Sierra Nevada mountains. Nestled among towering pines stood a secluded two-story cabin, its wooded exterior blending with the surrounding forest. The property, popular on Airbnb for its isolation, promised a peaceful retreat from urban life. Tasha Greystone, a 27-year-old graphic designer from San Francisco, had booked the cabin for a solo getaway. Colleagues described her as hard-working and creative, often pulling late nights to meet deadlines. This trip was her chance to decompress. She arrived Monday afternoon, unpacked groceries, and settled in. That evening, she prepared dinner, opened wine, and left windows cracked for mountain air, a decision that would prove fatal. Earlier that day, Tasha had hiked along the nearby Eagle Falls Trail, posting photos of the spectacular views to her social media accounts. Finally disconnecting, she wrote, unaware of the wildlife warnings posted at the trailhead. Local rangers had documented increased bear activity in the area, with 3 cabin break-ins reported in the previous week alone. The drought had pushed bears to seek alternative food sources, bringing them dangerously close to vacation properties throughout the basin. The cabin's owner, Martin Reeves, had installed bear-proof trash containers outside but failed to include proper wildlife safety instructions in the rental information. A simple reminder to close and lock all windows might have prevented what was about to unfold. Tasha's friends would later recall her love of fresh air and how she always slept with windows open, even in her San Francisco apartment. Black bears in Tahoe had been particularly active that fall. A summer drought reduced their natural food sources before hibernation. Wildlife officials had issued warnings about proper food storage, but many visitors remained unaware. Adult black bears can weigh up to 500 pounds with remarkable strength when motivated by hunger. At 2:30 in the morning, a male black bear detected food scents through the partially open kitchen window. The animal, weighing around 350 pounds, had been foraging nearby properties for weeks. It pushed the window wider and climbed inside, drawn by granola, fruit, and groceries left on the counter. The bear had developed a pattern of behavior that wildlife biologists call food conditioning, associating human structures with easy meals. This particular animal had already broken into 2 vehicles and a garage in the previous month, according to wildlife officials who later examined its DNA and tracking records. Tasha, asleep upstairs, woke to movement below. Assuming another guest, she descended to investigate. At the bottom step, she came face to face with the massive bear. The animal, startled by her sudden appearance, immediately became defensive. Tasha backed away, but the bear advanced. When she turned to flee, it lunged, striking her with its paw and sending her crashing into the dining table. The impact fractured ribs and dislocated her shoulder. As she attempted to escape, the bear bit her leg, causing severe damage and heavy bleeding. Blood pooled on the hardwood floor as the bear continued its attack. Its claws tore through her torso, causing massive internal injuries. The attack lasted several minutes as the bear mauled her repeatedly. By the time it returned to the food, Tasha had succumbed to her injuries, lying motionless beside the overturned furniture. The bear ransacked the kitchen, tearing open cabinets and refrigerator doors. It consumed nearly all available food before moving to the living room, where it destroyed furniture and personal belongings. Evidence suggested the animal remained in the cabin for several hours before finally departing through the same window it had entered. A neighbor walking his dog the next morning noticed the open window and damaged exterior, but assumed it was routine maintenance. This critical delay meant that emergency responders weren't called until hours later, though forensic analysis would later confirm that immediate medical intervention wouldn't have saved Tasha given the severity of her injuries. The property owner discovered Tasha's body the following afternoon during a maintenance check. The bear had consumed most of the food before exiting, leaving devastation behind. Wildlife officials tracked the animal using DNA evidence and euthanized it 3 days later. The incident sparked changes to Airbnb policies in wildlife-prone areas, requiring hosts to provide safety information and proper food storage. Tasha's family established a foundation to educate visitors about wildlife safety in mountain communities. Lake Tahoe authorities reported that while bear encounters were common, fatal attacks remained extremely rare, with Tasha's death being the first recorded in the region in over 2 decades. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife subsequently launched an aggressive public awareness campaign targeting vacation rental guests throughout the Sierra Nevada region. October 12, 2022. In the remote wilderness of Banff National Park, Canada, the crisp autumn air carried the scent of pine and the promise of adventure. The Canadian Rockies stood majestically against the darkening sky as Shauna Behringer, a 31-year-old nature photographer from Vancouver, pitched her tent just outside the monitored camping zone. Her partner Alex helped secure their temporary home for the night, unaware that this decision would lead to tragedy. Shauna had built her reputation capturing the raw beauty of North America's wildlife. Her Instagram portfolio showcased breathtaking shots of wolves, moose, and bears in their natural habitats. This particular trip to Banff was meant to add stunning fall foliage and wildlife images to her growing collection. The couple had deliberately chosen a spot away from the crowded designated camping areas, seeking solitude and authentic wilderness experiences. Park rangers had posted numerous warning signs about proper food storage in bear country, but in their haste to set up camp before nightfall, Shauna and Alex made a fatal error. Several protein bars, trail mix, and scented toiletries remained inside their tent, a decision that violated park regulations and would soon attract unwanted attention. Food-conditioned bears had been increasingly approaching the Banff area in recent months. Wildlife officials had documented multiple incidents of bears raiding improperly secured campsites, though no attacks had occurred. The area where Shauna chose to camp had seen 3 bear sightings in the previous week alone. Local rangers had even placed additional warning signs at trailheads, but the couple had arrived after dark and missed these crucial alerts. Grizzly bears in the Banff region typically weigh between 300 to 700 pounds, with males being larger than females. These powerful omnivores possess incredible strength and a sense of smell that can detect food from over a mile away. By late autumn, grizzlies enter hyperphagia, an intense feeding period where they consume thousands of calories daily to prepare for winter hibernation. Their normally cautious nature around humans can be overridden by hunger as winter approaches. At approximately 2:13 in the morning, as the couple slept soundly in their tent, a male grizzly that had previously been hazed by park officials detected the scent of food. The bear, identified later as Bear 164, had been pushed toward human settlements due to territorial disputes with other males and the lure of easy meals. Fresh paw prints discovered the next day showed it had circled the tent several times before making its move. The first indication of danger came as a low, huffing sound outside the tent. Shauna stirred from her sleep, nudging Alex awake. Before either could react, the fabric of their tent ripped open with a violent tearing sound as the grizzly's powerful claws shredded through the nylon material. In the darkness, illuminated only by the beam of a hastily grabbed flashlight, the massive silhouette of the bear loomed over them. The grizzly lunged forward, its jaws clamping down on Shauna's shoulder. Her collarbone shattered as the bear's teeth penetrated deep into muscle tissue. Alex scrambled backward toward the tent opening, screaming for help. The bear, focused entirely on Shauna, dragged her from the sleeping bag. Its claws raked across her torso, causing severe lacerations. Blood saturated the tent floor as Shauna fought desperately, striking at the bear's face. The grizzly responded by shaking her violently, causing catastrophic internal injuries. Within moments, Shauna lost consciousness from the massive blood loss and trauma. Alex managed to escape the tent and climb a nearby tree, where he watched in horror as the bear dragged Shauna's body several meters from the campsite. The grizzly continued to maul her before beginning to feed. Park rangers and emergency responders arrived at the remote location hours later, finding Alex still in the tree suffering from hypothermia and shock. Shauna's body was recovered the following morning after the bear had left the area. An investigation revealed that Bear 164 had been previously identified as a problem bear that had been hazed away from campgrounds on multiple occasions but never relocated. Following the attack, wildlife officials tracked the grizzly using DNA evidence from the scene and euthanized it 3 days later. The fatal encounter became the first documented grizzly-caused human death in Banff in over a decade, prompting wildlife officials to review their bear management protocols. Local guides reported a noticeable increase in visitors requesting bear safety information in the months following Shauna's death. November 17, 2008. The bustling streets of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, fell quiet as night descended upon the city. The capital's outskirts, where industrial zones meet residential areas, are typically deserted after dark except for the occasional security guard making their rounds. The area was dotted with poorly regulated facilities, including an illegal exotic animal compound that would soon become the epicenter of tragedy. Rahim Gebrselassie, a 37-year-old security guard, had been working at a warehouse complex for nearly 3 years. A father of 2 with a reputation for reliability, Rahim had taken the night shift to earn extra money for his family. The job was usually uneventful, checking locks, monitoring for trespassers, and making hourly rounds through the dimly lit alleys between buildings. That night, however, something was different. Several stray dogs in the area were unusually agitated, barking incessantly at the shadows. Unknown to Rahim, a male lion had escaped from a nearby illegal exotic animal facility earlier that evening. The owner had been collecting dangerous animals for years, housing them in substandard conditions with inadequate security measures. A combination of poor enclosure design and negligent supervision had allowed the predator to slip away unnoticed. African lions are apex predators, weighing between 330 and 420 pounds, with powerful muscles designed for taking down large prey. In their natural habitat, they hunt primarily at dawn, dusk, and night, relying on stealth rather than speed for most of their approach. The escaped lion, likely stressed and disoriented in the unfamiliar urban environment, had been moving through the shadows, following the paths of least resistance, drainage ditches, alleyways, and vacant lots. At approximately 2:15 in the morning, Rahim was making his routine patrol near the back of the warehouse complex. He carried only a flashlight and a radio as he walked between 2 large storage buildings. The narrow passage was poorly lit, with several dumpsters creating areas of complete darkness. As Rahim approached one such area, his flashlight beam briefly caught a reflection of eyes in the darkness. The attack happened without warning. The lion charged from approximately 15 feet away, a distance it covered in less than a second. The initial impact knocked Rahim to the ground, his flashlight skittering across the pavement. The lion, following instinctual hunting behavior, immediately targeted Rahim's neck and face, a technique evolved to quickly immobilize prey by cutting off air supply rather than causing immediate blood loss. Rahim's cries for help echoed briefly through the complex. A night watchman in a building across the street later reported hearing shouts followed by what he described as terrible sounds, but was too frightened to investigate or even look out his window. The entire attack likely lasted less than a minute. The lion's powerful jaws closed around Rahim's neck, cutting off his airway. Death would have come relatively quickly from asphyxiation, with unconsciousness occurring within 10 to 20 seconds. After Rahim was no longer moving, the lion dragged his body a short distance behind one of the dumpsters, a natural behavior to move prey away from the open and into a more secluded location. Evidence at the scene suggested the lion remained with the body for several hours before moving on. Though feeding was minimal, another indication of the predator's disoriented state in the unfamiliar environment. Rahim's body was discovered at 5:45 in the morning by another security guard arriving for the morning shift. Authorities were immediately called and police secured the area. Local wildlife officials and police officers conducted a careful search of the surrounding neighborhood, eventually locating the lion in an abandoned construction site approximately 400 meters from the attack location. Given the urban setting and immediate danger to the public, officials made the decision to euthanize the animal rather than attempt capture. A police marksman dispatched the lion with a single shot. The subsequent investigation confirmed it had escaped from an illegal exotic animal facility owned by a local businessman with connections to wildlife trafficking. The facility owner was arrested and faced multiple charges, including criminal negligence resulting in death and illegal possession of protected wildlife. He was eventually sentenced to 8 years in prison, though many in the community felt the punishment was insufficient given the preventable nature of the tragedy. Rahim's family struggled in the aftermath. While they received some compensation through the court, the loss of the family's primary provider created lasting hardship. His widow eventually relocated with their children to live with relatives in another part of the city. The incident prompted a brief period of increased enforcement of wildlife regulations in Addis Ababa, though critics noted that systemic issues and oversight remained largely unaddressed. The tragic death of Rahim Gabrielasi serves as a stark reminder of the dangers that can emerge when wild predators enter human spaces through negligence and illegal activity. Yet his story would not be the last of its kind. Just months later in northern India, forest ranger Vikram Singh would encounter a similar fate while investigating reports of a tiger near the edge of a national park. The predator's unusual behavior would raise questions about the increasing conflicts between humans and wildlife in rapidly developing regions. October 9, 2016 dawned with a brilliant African sunrise, casting golden rays across the vast expanse of Luangwa Valley. The air was thick with humidity, promising another scorching day in the Zambian wilderness. For Dr. Eileen Moravec, this weather was perfect, ideal conditions for the cold-blooded subjects of her research to emerge from their nighttime hideaways. At 39, Eileen had dedicated her entire adult life to understanding the world's most misunderstood creatures. Growing up in a small town outside of Boston, she'd been fascinated by reptiles since finding a garden snake at age 7. While other girls collected dolls, Eileen filled notebooks with sketches of snakes, lizards, and turtles. Her bedroom walls weren't covered with posters of boy bands, but with scientific illustrations of reptile anatomy and distribution maps of venomous species across continents. Her parents had hoped it was just a phase, but by 22, she had graduated with honors in zoology. And by 28, she had earned her doctorate with groundbreaking research on venom evolution in African elapids. The Luangwa Valley Project was her dream assignment, 3 months of field research tracking and documenting the behavior patterns of some of Africa's deadliest snakes. She'd been particularly focused on the black mamba, a species whose reputation for aggression she believed was largely misunderstood. Her preliminary findings suggested that these sleek, lightning-fast predators were actually quite shy and preferred retreat over confrontation when given the option. In the evening before her fatal encounter, Dr. Eileen Moravec had shared her insights with Marcus about black mambas. She passionately explained that these creatures weren't the mindless killers people imagined, but sophisticated predators with complex behaviors. She believed that better understanding these behaviors could save both snake and human lives. Marcus admired Eileen's passion, but worried about her tendency to take calculated risks. She was meticulous about safety protocols, always wearing the proper boots, carrying anti-venom in their field kit, keeping compression bandages at hand. But she also believed that to truly understand these animals, one had to observe them in their natural state, undisturbed and behaving naturally. That morning, Eileen had been particularly excited. Their motion sensor cameras had captured footage of a large black mamba using the same basking site 3 days in a row, a perfect opportunity to observe natural behavior patterns. She packed her field journal, camera, and observation equipment with the careful precision that characterized all her work. The black mamba was Africa's longest venomous snake, capable of reaching lengths of up to 14 feet, though most averaged around 8 feet. Despite their name, they weren't actually black. Their scales ranged from olive to grayish brown. The black referred to the inky color inside their mouths, which they displayed when threatened. What made them particularly dangerous was their combination of highly potent neurotoxic venom and speed, capable of moving up to 12.5 miles per hour in short bursts. Following established protocol, Eileen and Marcus approached the basking site together, maintaining visual contact at all times. The site was a small clearing with a fallen log that had been rotting for years, creating the perfect micro-habitat for a variety of creatures. Eileen knelt beside the log, her movements slow and deliberate, while Marcus remained close by with their field kit open and ready. After several minutes of careful observation, Eileen saw no signs of the mamba. Following standard field procedures, she used her snake hook to gently lift a section of loose bark on the log, probing cautiously before each movement. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. As Eileen carefully lifted the bark, Marcus, standing just a few feet away, caught a flash of movement so quick it seemed almost like a trick of light. The black mamba, concealed in a hollow beneath the bark, erupted from its hiding place with explosive force. The snake's sleek body launched upward like a coiled spring releasing, its head moving faster than the human eye could track. Its mouth gaped open, revealing the characteristic black interior that gave the species its name, a glimpse of darkness that would be the last thing many victims ever saw. The first strike caught Eileen on her forearm, just above her protective glove. The mamba's fangs, nearly a quarter-inch long, penetrated her skin with surgical precision, injecting venom directly into her tissue. Eileen gasped, more from surprise than immediate pain, and instinctively pulled back her arm. This defensive movement triggered the mamba's second strike. The snake, now fully in defensive mode, targeted the exposed skin at Eileen's waist, where her field shirt had risen slightly. The fang sank deep, delivering a second dose of neurotoxic venom that would prove fatal. Marcus lunged forward with his snake hook, but the mamba had already retreated back into the log's recesses, its attack complete in less than 2 seconds. Eileen remained kneeling. She looked down at her arm where 2 small puncture wounds were already beginning to weep tiny beads of blood. A similar pair of punctures marked her side. The venom began its work immediately, though the full effects wouldn't be apparent for several minutes. Black mamba venom contains potent neurotoxins that attack the nervous system, gradually shutting down neural pathways and eventually leading to respiratory paralysis. Unlike some venoms that cause immediate excruciating pain, mamba venom's initial subtlety belies its deadly efficiency. When the emergency struck, Marcus implemented their emergency protocol while Eileen, still conscious, guided her own first aid procedures. Her hands remained steady as she directed Marcus to apply the pressure bandages, her scientific mind still functioning with remarkable clarity despite knowing what was coming. Marcus contacted emergency services via satellite phone, which connected successfully. He administered their field anti-venom kit, standard procedure for researchers working with highly venomous species in remote locations. Despite these prompt measures, the double bite from a large mamba had delivered a massive venom dose. Within 30 minutes, Eileen began experiencing the progressive symptoms of mamba envenomation. Tingling around the bite sites, followed by increasing difficulty swallowing and a heaviness in her limbs as the neurotoxins began affecting her nervous system. The emergency helicopter arrived 50 minutes after the bite, by which time Eileen was experiencing significant respiratory distress as the neurotoxins affected her diaphragm. The medical team administered additional anti-venom and placed her on ventilator support, but the venom's effects were advancing rapidly through her system. Throughout the emergency flight to the regional hospital, Eileen remained conscious, although the neurotoxins were gradually paralyzing her respiratory muscles. Despite maximum medical intervention, including multiple doses of anti-venom and medical ventilation, she succumbed to her respiratory failure approximately 4 hours after the bite. The morning of May 14, 2022 began with heavy rain pounding the windows of Devon Blakely's suburban home on Australia's Gold Coast. The 29-year-old exotic snake owner had planned to spend the day maintaining his collection, a hobby that consumed his life for the past 7 years. Devon was known throughout the reptile enthusiast community for his extensive knowledge and growing collection of venomous species. Friends described him as meticulous about safety, always emphasizing proper handling techniques to fellow collectors. His pride and joy was a room specifically converted for housing his collection, a temperature-controlled space with reinforced doors and specialized enclosures for over a dozen venomous snakes. Among them was his newest acquisition, an inland taipan. The inland taipan possesses venom 50 times more toxic than that of a cobra. A single bite contains enough venom to kill 100 adult humans, with its cocktail of neurotoxins, hemotoxins, and myotoxins attacking multiple body systems simultaneously. In the wild, these snakes are actually shy and reclusive, rarely encountering humans in their remote desert habitat. His girlfriend always worried that he may go too far with his collection, but she couldn't stop him, eventually letting him have his freedom in these animals. She convinced herself that Devon was experienced enough to know how to handle these reptiles. Devon had been waiting for months for the proper permits to keep this particular species, and he had only received the snake 2 weeks prior. The inland taipan, also known as the fierce snake, was paradoxically known for its shy, reclusive nature in the wild. Despite possessing the world's most potent venom, these snakes rarely encountered humans in their remote desert habitat in central East Australia. Obtaining the proper permits for keeping such a dangerous species had been a bureaucratic nightmare. Devon had completed specialized handling courses, installed additional security measures, and submitted to regular inspections. The final piece, a supply of specific taipan anti-venom to keep on site, was still caught in red tape. The Wildlife Authority had promised it would be delivered within the week, but Devon couldn't wait to begin working with his new prize. That rainy Saturday morning, Devon's girlfriend went grocery shopping while he went on with cleaning the snake enclosure. Devon entered his snake room to perform routine maintenance. He was particularly careful with the taipan enclosure, using a snake hook as he'd done countless times before. But professional handlers know that taipans should never be manipulated with hooks alone. The proper procedure involves guiding them into clear tubes where they can be safely contained without directly handling. But Devon, perhaps overconfident from his years of experience with other species, attempted to guide the taipan with just his hook. He carefully opened the enclosure, snake hook in his right hand, clear acrylic shield in his left, standard safety protocol. The taipan was hiding in its favorite spot, beneath a small artificial cave. Devon gently touched the snake's midsection with his hook, intending to guide it into the temporary container. The taipan, however, had other ideas. With the explosive speed characteristic of its species, the snake shot forward, not toward the container, but along the edge of the enclosure. Devon reacted quickly, adjusting his hook to redirect the animal, but in doing so, he momentarily lowered his acrylic shield. It was all the opening the taipan needed. The snake launched itself upward with incredible precision, sailing past the hook and striking Devon's exposed wrist just below his protective glove. The fang sank deep, delivering a massive dose of venom before Devon could even register what had happened. The feeding schedule indicated the taipan was due for a meal, and Devon prepared accordingly, knowing that hungry snakes were often more aggressive. What happened next was pieced together from the scene discovered later. While manipulating the enclosure, Devon apparently misjudged the taipan's position. The snake, quick and agile despite its typically calm demeanor, evaded the hook and struck, sinking its fangs into Devon's wrist between his protective glove and sleeve. Following his emergency protocols, Devon attempted first aid, applying a pressure bandage to the bite site. He had been waiting for a specialized anti-venom delivery that had been delayed due to licensing requirements. Without this crucial antidote on hand, Devon's situation quickly became dire. The inland taipan's venom was primarily neurotoxic, but also contains powerful hemotoxins and myotoxins. Unlike the black mamba's fast-acting neurotoxins, the taipan's venom typically took longer to manifest severe symptoms, usually 2 to 6 hours without treatment. This gave victims a larger window for medical intervention, but once symptoms progressed, the outcome was equally fatal. His girlfriend, returning from shopping approximately 30 minutes after the bite occurred, found Devon collapsed on the floor of the snake room, already showing signs of envenomation. His breathing was labored and he was experiencing intense abdominal pain, early symptoms of taipan envenomation. She immediately called emergency services. The paramedics arrived within 12 minutes of the call, remarkably fast, but the taipan venom worked faster. The paramedics worked efficiently, establishing an IV, administering oxygen, and preparing him for immediate transport. They confirmed what Devon already knew. They didn't carry taipan antivenom. It would be waiting at the hospital, they assured him. Devon Blakely was pronounced dead at Gold Coast University Hospital approximately 3 hours after the bite. The taipan antivenom arrived by helicopter 20 minutes after his death, a cruel timing that haunted Melissa for years afterward. While some snake encounters happen in controlled environments, like Devon's specialized room, others occur in the wild where humans unknowingly enter snake territory. August 19, 2014 was a humid day in Ecuador's Esmeraldas province. The rainforest canopy dripped with moisture from an early morning shower, creating a symphony of water droplets hitting leaves. For Ramon Estevez, this was the perfect backdrop for his eco-tourism adventure. The 45-year-old Spanish accountant had always been drawn to wild places. His modest apartment back home was filled with souvenirs from his travels. A tribal mask from Papua New Guinea, a ceremonial knife from the Amazon, photographs of mountain summits from 4 continents. This 3-week journey through Ecuador's most biodiverse regions was a celebration of sorts. After 20 years of dedicated work, he had finally arranged a sabbatical year to pursue his dream of visiting the world's great wilderness areas. This particular morning, Ramon had joined a guided hike through a remote section of the Ecuadorian rainforest. The group consisted of Ramon, 2 other tourists, and their experienced local guide. They had been walking for nearly 3 hours, with the guide pointing out various medicinal plants and wildlife along the established trail. The guide had warned them about the dangers of the rainforest, including the South African bushmaster, locally known as Vuragosa or warty snake, due to its distinctive ridged scales. These vipers were masters of camouflage, with their brown and tan patterned bodies blending perfectly with the forest floor. Growing up to 12 feet long, bushmasters were the largest venomous snakes in the Americas and possess a potent hemotoxic venom that destroys tissue and prevents blood clotting. Around midday, the group paused near a small clearing. While the others rested, Ramon noticed a splash of color just off the trail, a rare orchid species he had been hoping to photograph. Without alerting the guide, he stepped carefully off the path, camera in hand, moving toward the base of a large ceiba tree where the orchids grew. Reaching the orchid, Ramon crouched down, adjusting his camera settings to capture the flower's intricate details. Satisfied with his photographs, Ramon prepared to return to the group. As he shifted his weight to stand, his boot disturbed a thick layer of leaf litter near the base of the tree. The South American bushmaster, Lachesis muta, had been perfectly camouflaged among the brown and tan leaf litter. At up to 12 feet long, the bushmaster is the largest pit viper in the Americas, with heat-sensing pits that allow it to detect warm-blooded prey with precision. Despite its size, its pattern of tan and brown scales creates perfect camouflage among fallen leaves. This snake was likely hunting for small mammals that frequented the area. Bushmasters are primarily nocturnal hunters, but this one had remained in its daytime resting spot rather than retreating to a burrow. The bushmaster, disturbed from its resting place, reacted defensively. Before Ramon could process what was happening, the viper struck, driving its fangs deep into his lower leg, just above his hiking boot. The pain was immediate and intense, like 2 hot needles being driven into his calf muscle. Ramon cried out, stumbling backward and falling against a tree trunk. The snake, having delivered its defensive strike, slithered rapidly away into the undergrowth. Ramon's shout alerted the guide, who was at his side within seconds, the rest of the group hanging back in horror. The guide immediately recognized the severity of the situation upon seeing the distinctive bushmaster retreating into the underbrush. Unlike some venomous snakes that deliver dry bites without venom, bushmasters typically injected large amounts of venom with each strike, an evolutionary adaptation for killing prey like rabbits and aguits. The guide applied a pressure bandage and instructed the other tourists to help carry Ramon back toward the trailhead where their boat was docked. Unlike the neurotoxic venoms of cobras or mambas that attack the nervous system, the bushmaster's hemotoxic venom worked by destroying tissue and preventing blood from clotting, a slower but equally deadly mechanism. The effects of the venom manifested within 30 minutes. Ramon's leg had swollen dramatically, with bruising spreading upward from the bite site as blood vessels ruptured beneath the skin. By the 1-hour mark, he was disoriented and struggling to remain conscious as internal bleeding began. His blood pressure dropped dangerously as fluids leaked from his damaged blood vessels. Despite the guide's best effort to reach help quickly, Ramon's condition deteriorated with each passing hour. His breathing became labored and his pulse weakened as the venom circulated through his system. So they made the decision at that critical moment: get Ramon to the hospital as quick as possible. With all the strength they had, they assisted Ramon, carrying him shoulder to shoulder to the river where their only vehicle is located. By the 3-hour mark, they reached the river where their boat was docked. Ramon was barely responsive, his breathing shallow and irregular. Carlos immediately radioed ahead to the medical station, describing Ramon's symptoms and requesting that anti-venom be prepared. The boat journey downriver took another excruciating hour. By the time they reached the medical station, Ramon had lost consciousness completely. The rural clinic had basic anti-venom supplies, but not the specific Bushmaster anti-venom needed for optimal treatment. The doctor administered what they had available, a polyvalent anti-venom designed to work against several pit viper species, while arranging emergency transport to a hospital in Esmeralda City. Despite the medical team's best efforts, Ramon Estevez was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. Ramon had succumbed to the venom's effects. The autopsy revealed extensive internal hemorrhaging and tissue necrosis consistent with Bushmaster envenomation. Local authorities used Ramon's case to emphasize the importance of staying on marked trails and always remaining within sight of guides when in snake territory. September 3, 2016 began with a gentle mist hanging over the rice paddies of Chiang Rai, Thailand. The early harvest season had brought the entire community to the fields, including 13-year-old Molly Ratanpong and her grandparents. Molly was the pride of her family, bright, hard-working, and unfailingly kind. Unlike many children her age who dreamed of escaping to Bangkok, Molly loved the rhythm of rural life. She excelled in school, particularly mathematics and science. Her teachers often told her parents she could earn a university scholarship if she continued her diligent work. This particular harvest had begun early due to concerns about approaching storms. The entire village had mobilized, with families working from dawn until dusk to bring in the crop that would sustain them through the coming year. As the sun began to disappear, Molly's grandparents called for her to stop her work, but she refused to. She wanted to continue, which her family agreed to, knowing she never got home late. Molly set down her basket of cut rice and headed toward the canal that separated their family's paddy from the neighboring field. The narrow waterway was lined with thick vegetation, a mix of tall grasses, bamboo, and tangled shrubs that provided habitat for the frogs, snakes, and small mammals that were part of the rice field ecosystem. As she approached the spot where she'd left her sickle, the fading light made it difficult to see clearly. Molly stepped carefully along the muddy bank, mindful of her footing on the slippery surface. She reached down to grab the sickle, her fingers just brushing the handle. What Molly couldn't see in the gathering dusk was the massive reticulated python that had been watching her approach. The 16-foot snake had been hiding in the thick brush along the canal, its patterned skin providing perfect camouflage among the shadows and vegetation. Reticulated pythons are among the world's longest snakes, capable of growing over 20 feet in length. Though primarily nocturnal, they hunt whenever opportunity presents itself. Their distinctive net-like pattern of scales creates perfect camouflage in dappled light, and their incredible strength allows them to subdue prey many times their weight. Unlike venomous snakes that kill with toxins, pythons kill by constriction, tightening their powerful muscles around the victim's chest each time they exhale, gradually preventing the lungs from expanding. Contrary to popular belief, pythons don't crush prey but rather cause death through cardiac arrest by preventing normal blood circulation. As Molly bent to retrieve her sickle, the python struck with explosive force. There was no warning, no rattle, no hiss, just the lightning-fast lunge of powerful muscles that had evolved over millions of years to capture prey. Molly, small for her age at just under 5 feet tall and weighing about 85 pounds, represented potential prey for the large python. In the dim twilight, the snake may have mistaken her for a smaller animal, or perhaps it was simply opportunistic. The snake's head hit Molly with such force that she was knocked off balance, falling backward into the muddy bank. Before she could scream, the python's body was wrapping around her torso, powerful coils tightening with each of Molly's panicked breaths. Her initial cry was cut short as the constriction forced air from her lungs. The python's grip tightened methodically, not crushing bones as commonly believed, but preventing Molly from drawing breath, slowly suffocating her while cutting off blood flow to her brain. With each heartbeat, the coils tightened further. Molly struggled desperately, her hands clawing at the muscular coils, her feet kicking at the muddy bank. But the python's strength was overwhelming, its grip implacable. The snake began dragging her toward the denser vegetation, an instinctual behavior when capturing prey. Back at the main field, Molly's grandparents finished packing their tools, assuming their granddaughter had already started walking home ahead of them. It wasn't until they returned to the village and spoke with the neighbors that they found out Molly had not returned home yet. The explanation sent a chill through him. Molly was never late, never irresponsible. Something was wrong. They immediately gathered flashlights and called neighbors. Within minutes, a search party had formed. Men and women from nearby homes, armed with lights and calling Molly's name as they retraced the path from the rice fields. They reached the family's paddy and spread out, searching methodically. Molly's grandpa headed straight for the canal where his daughter had reportedly gone to retrieve her sickle. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the muddy bank. The sickle lay where Molly had spotted it, partially submerged in the mud at the water's edge. Nearby, the ground showed signs of a struggle. Disturbed mud, flattened grass, and a single sandal that Molly's grandpa recognized as his granddaughter's. The search party converged on the spot, their lights scanning the area. One of the men, a former hunter named Chai, noticed the drag marks leading into the thick vegetation along the canal. With machetes, the men began cutting through the dense undergrowth, following the disturbed path. They had gone about 20 feet when Chai's flashlight illuminated a scene from a nightmare. The massive python lay coiled around Molly's motionless form. Unlike sensationalized stories, the snake had not yet begun to swallow her. Pythons typically wait hours after a kill before beginning to consume large prey. Instead, it remained tightly wrapped around her body, still applying pressure even though Molly had already succumbed to asphyxiation. Molly's grandpa's anguished cry echoed across the fields. The men rushed forward, machetes raised. The python, disturbed by the lights and noise, attempted to retreat deeper into the vegetation, still gripping its prey. Chai, acting on instinct and rage, brought the machete down on the snake's neck, severing its head with a single powerful stroke. The massive body continued to writhe and coil for several minutes, a reflex action that continued even after death. When they finally managed to unwrap the python's massive coils from Molly's body, it was clear she had been dead for at least an hour. Her face was peaceful, almost as if she were sleeping, but her lips had turned blue from lack of oxygen. News of the tragedy spread quickly through the province. By morning, local wildlife authorities had arrived to investigate, confirming that the python was 18 feet long. It was large but not exceptional for the species, which can reach over 20 feet in the wild. Experts noted that the snake was healthy and in its prime, likely having established a territory along the canal where small mammals came to drink. The incident sent shockwaves through the community. Farmers were advised to work in pairs and avoid the canal areas during dawn and dusk when pythons are most active. Wildlife biologists explained that such attacks were extremely rare. Reticulated pythons, despite their size, typically avoid humans and prefer natural prey like monkeys, pigs, and deer. The attack on Molly was an anomaly, a tragic intersection of human and animal territories in a changing landscape where agricultural development increasingly encroached on wildlife habitat. Molly's tragic death serves as a sobering reminder that even in areas where humans have cultivated the land for generations, wild predators still maintain territories and hunting patterns that occasionally intersect with human activity, often with devastating consequences. June 9, 2015 was a sweltering day in Miami, Florida, with temperatures climbing into the high 90s and humidity that made the air feel thick and oppressive. As night fell, the temperature remained uncomfortably warm, prompting many residents to crank up their air conditioning units to find relief from the tropical climate. Eliza Carradine was a 29-year-old graphic designer who had moved to Miami 2 years earlier, drawn by the city's creative energy and year-round sunshine. Eliza loved bright colors, covering her apartment with indoor plants, and reading books at night. With her bright smile and easygoing personality, she had quickly made friends in her apartment building and around the neighborhood. Living alone in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Little Havana, Eliza had created a cozy space filled with plants, artwork, and books. She had recently been promoted to senior designer and was excited about the new responsibilities and creative challenges that came with the position. That particular day had been especially exhausting for Eliza. After grabbing food, she returned to her apartment looking forward to a quiet evening of relaxation. After dinner, Eliza took a long shower, changed into her comfortable pajamas, and settled into bed. The summer heat had prompted her to turn up the air conditioning. She began to drift off to sleep. What Eliza didn't know was that her upstairs neighbor had been illegally keeping exotic pets in his apartment for years. Among his collection was a 16-foot Burmese python that he raised in secret, against both building regulations and Florida state law. That night, the massive snake had managed to escape its inadequately secured enclosure. It had slithered out of the neighbor's apartment through his partially open balcony door. The python then descended to the level below by using the building's exterior, its powerful muscles allowing it to navigate the short distance between floors. Burmese pythons are excellent climbers, using their muscular bodies and rough scales to grip surfaces and move vertically with surprising agility. Due to the excess of heat, even with the AC on, Eliza left her balcony door open for fresh air to circulate in, providing the perfect entry point for the predator. Burmese pythons are among the largest snake species in the world, capable of growing over 20 feet long and weighing more than 200 pounds. Native to Southeast Asia, these powerful constrictors are ambush predators, using their excellent sense of smell to locate prey and their incredible strength to squeeze the life from their victims. As Eliza slept peacefully in her bed, the python silently entered through the balcony door and began to explore this new environment. Pythons have heat-sensing pits along their jaws that allow them to detect the body heat of potential prey even in complete darkness. Though not a typical predator to humans, pythons are opportunistic, especially when hunger and heat combine. Drawn by the warmth of Eliza's body, the python slowly approached the bed. Eliza stirred in her sleep. This slight movement was enough to trigger the python's predatory instinct. In one fluid motion, the massive reptile struck, wrapping its muscular coils around Eliza's torso and beginning to constrict. Contrary to popular belief, pythons don't crush their prey or break bones. Instead, they prevent breathing by tightening their coils each time the victim exhales, making it impossible to draw the next breath. Eliza's eyes opened in terror as she felt the crushing pressure around her chest. She tried to scream, but the python's grip had already begun to restrict her ability to draw breath. With her arms pinned to her sides, she thrashed desperately. The python responded to her struggles by tightening its grip further. Each time Eliza exhaled, the snake constricted more, preventing her from taking in a full breath. With each passing second, Eliza's movements became weaker as oxygen deprivation began to affect her brain. In her final moments of consciousness, Eliza managed to kick her legs forcefully enough to knock several books from the shelf, creating a loud thump. Her neighbor in the adjacent apartment, who had been having trouble sleeping, heard the commotion and the loud thump. Concerned, the neighbor knocked on Eliza's door. Receiving no response, she alerted the building's landlord, who had a master key. By the time they entered the apartment, it was already too late. They found Eliza's lifeless body on the floor beside her bed, still partially wrapped in the python's coils. The landlord immediately called 911 and police and animal control officers arrived within minutes. The python was captured and later euthanized for testing. The neighbor was arrested and charged with multiple offenses, including manslaughter, illegal possession of exotic animals, and violation of Florida's wildlife laws. He eventually received a 7-year prison sentence. It was March 2023. The morning mist hung heavy over the West Sulawesi forest, and Frank and Mary Holloway had set out for an early morning hike from their homestay on the edge of the forest. Frank Holloway was a 67-year-old retired Navy officer from San Diego, California. His wife Mary, 65, was a former nurse. Their social media accounts indicated they had been traveling through Southeast Asia for 3 months, visiting Thailand, Vietnam, and Cambodia before arriving in Indonesia. What the couple likely didn't fully appreciate was the ancient predator that called these forests home. Reticulated pythons are among the world's longest snakes, with specimens regularly exceeding 20 feet in length. These massive constrictors can weigh over 200 pounds and possess incredible strength. Their muscular coils can exert pressure of up to 90 pounds per square inch, enough to stop blood flow and cause cardiac arrest in prey within minutes. Unlike venomous snakes, pythons kill through constriction, tightening their grip with each exhale of their victim until asphyxiation occurs. Their homestay owner, a man named Pak Dharma, had warned them about venturing into the forest alone. He spoke of many dangers dwelling there, which Frank had interpreted metaphorically rather than as the practical warning it was intended to be. When Frank announced his intention to hike at dawn, Pak Dharma had frowned but merely suggested they stick to the marked paths and not go alone. That morning, they set out just as the sky began to lighten, following a narrow trail that wound deeper into the forest than they had ventured before. Frank walked ahead. Mary followed a few paces behind, her phone ready to capture photographs of the exotic flora and fauna they encountered. An hour into their hike, they reached a small clearing where sunlight streamed through a break in the canopy. Frank decided it was the perfect spot for morning meditation. Mary found a fallen log to sit on while Frank settled on a patch of moss. As Frank meditated, Mary decided to explore the immediate area, staying within earshot but wanting to photograph some unusual flowers she had spotted. After about 15 minutes of photography, Mary heard a strange sound, something between a grunt and a gasp. Concerned, she hurried back toward the clearing. What she found would haunt her for the rest of her life. Frank was no longer sitting in meditation. Instead, he was on the ground, his body partially wrapped in the massive coils of a reticulated python. The snake, at least 18 feet long, had already constricted around Frank's chest and legs. His face was turning blue, his eyes bulging as he struggled weakly against the powerful reptile. Mary screamed and rushed forward, grabbing a fallen branch to strike at the snake. Her hands trembled, and she managed to take a blurry photo with her phone before dropping it to use both hands to fight the python. Despite Mary's desperate efforts to save her husband, the python's grip only tightened. With each breath Frank exhaled, the snake's coils constricted further, a hunting technique perfected over millions of years. Unlike mammalian predators that kill with teeth and claws, pythons are patient killers, using their incredible muscular strength to slowly squeeze the life from their prey. The pressure exerted is so precise, that it prevents the lungs from expanding while simultaneously cutting off blood flow to the brain and heart. Within minutes, Frank had lost consciousness from asphyxiation. Mary, exhausted and hysterical, ran back toward the homestay to get help, getting lost several times in her panic before finally stumbling onto the main trail. By the time she returned with Pac Dharma and several local men, Frank had been dead for over an hour. The python had begun the process of consuming him, having dislocated its jaws to work over his head and shoulders. The sight was so horrific that Mary collapsed, requiring medical attention herself. The locals, familiar with python behavior, knew that once a python this size had begun to consume prey, it becomes vulnerable and sluggish. They were able to kill the snake and extract Frank's body, though the trauma to his upper body was severe. The incident made international headlines, particularly after a local villager recorded video of the python being cut open to remove Frank's remains. While python attacks on humans are rare, they are not unprecedented in this region. Local authorities noted that deforestation had pushed these massive predators closer to human settlements, increasing the likelihood of such encounters. Mary Holloway returned to the United States with her husband's remains, devastated by the loss and traumatized by what she had witnessed. In a brief statement through family members, she urged travelers to respect local warnings about wildlife dangers and never to venture into unfamiliar wilderness without proper guides. It was a quiet, humid evening in June 2018 on Muna Island, a small, tranquil land nestled off Sulawesi's southern coast. The air, thick with the scent of wet earth from the recent rains, was unusually cool for the time of year, a pleasant 68 degrees Fahrenheit after a sweltering day in the low 90s. The island, just over 650 square miles, was surrounded by turquoise waters and golden sandy beaches. Lush jungles, dense with undergrowth, hid freshwater lagoons and cascading waterfalls. But beneath their beauty, the jungles concealed a lurking danger, one that the island's inhabitants, like Watiba, would soon come to face, unseen and unforgiving. Watiba, a 54-year-old woman, had just finished her daily chores in the vegetable garden she tended to feed her family and sell at the local market. She had been struggling with wild boars that had been raiding her garden at night, destroying her crops. Her hard work was repeatedly ruined. Frustrated, she decided to take matters into her own hands. Tonight, she intended to drive them off for good. The walk to the garden, half a mile from the village, was one she knew well. It passed through thick undergrowth and rocky outcrops. Beyond the trees, the path curved toward a large cliff with caves on its rocky face, a known spot for snakes. Watiba had grown up in these surroundings and was familiar with the risks. As she walked, the night was still except for the occasional rustle of leaves. The jungle, normally full of life, felt oddly quiet tonight. She arrived at her garden and immediately saw the wild boars. They were rooting around, their snouts digging into the freshly planted vegetables. Without hesitation, Watiba shouted and clapped her hands. The boars squealed and bolted into the forest. Relieved, she moved closer to inspect the damage. The flashlight beam flickered across the overturned soil, showing signs of destruction. But as Watiba leaned in to assess the mess, something far more dangerous was closing in. A predator, attracted by the scent of the boars, had caught the trail and was moving swiftly toward her. Watiba didn't realize the danger until it was too late. A massive reticulated python, 23 feet long, suddenly struck. It lunged at Watiba, its fangs sinking into her back. The force of the strike sent her sprawling to the ground, the machete slipping from her grasp and falling with a clatter. Pain exploded across her body as she scrambled to get to her feet, but the python was faster. In one fluid motion, it coiled around her, its immense strength pinning her arms and legs. The pressure was suffocating. The python's body wrapped tighter with every movement she made. Watiba's vision blurred as she gasped for breath, her ribs unable to expand under the snake's constriction. The jungle, once alive with the sound of night, seemed eerily silent as she struggled in vain, her energy draining quickly. The crushing grip of the python left her helpless. She fought with every ounce of strength, but the snake's hold only tightened. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Watiba's body grew limp as the snake continued to constrict. Her heart raced before eventually slowing. The weight of the snake's body, combined with its unrelenting pressure, extinguished her life. In the darkness of the night, Watiba's struggles ceased. By morning, her family noticed she had not returned. They alerted the village and a search party of more than 100 people was formed. They retraced her steps, finding her flashlight and sandals near the garden, but no sign of her. The village grew desperate. Then a cry rang out. A villager had found something. A 23-foot reticulated python was struggling to move, its bloated body suggesting something inside it had been consumed. The search party killed the snake, severing its head before carefully carrying its enormous body back to the village. When the snake was laid out on the ground, a sharp knife was used to cut open its belly. What they found inside shocked them. Watiba's body, still intact and wearing the same clothes she had worn the night before, emerged from the python's gut. The village stood in stunned silence, some gasping in disbelief. The sight was too much to bear. Watiba had become the snake's prey. Her body was carefully laid out, and the villagers, shaken by the discovery, could only look on in horror. The event sent shockwaves through the community, and fear of the surrounding wilderness grew. The island had always been a place of peaceful isolation, but the encroachment of human activity on the natural world was beginning to cause increasingly dangerous encounters between people and wildlife. The balance had shifted, and the shadow of danger was now closer than ever. Watiba's funeral took place that same day, a somber event in which the village came together to mourn the loss of one of their own. Her children, still too young to fully grasp the enormity of what had happened, had to say their final goodbyes. When she left that evening to tend to her garden, no one could have predicted it would be the last time they would ever see her. The tragedy of Watiba's death was a grim reminder of the growing risks humans face as they encroach on the natural habitats of predators like the reticulated python. These large snakes, though typically not inclined to hunt humans, are opportunistic predators. As the forested areas of Sulawesi continue to be cleared for agriculture, these snakes are increasingly forced into contact with human settlements, and attacks like this have become more frequent. In the year before, another man had been killed by a reticulated python while working on a palm oil plantation in Sulawesi. The man's body was discovered inside the snake, much like Watiba's. It was a warm, clear evening on September 9, 2023, at Kumala State School, a place filled with the sounds of laughter and familiar chatter of long-lost friends reconnecting. The occasion was special, the 100th anniversary of the school, and former students, now scattered far and wide, had gathered to celebrate the memories of their shared past. Donald Morrison, at 68, was among them, surrounded by the faces of those who had once shared the same classrooms and schoolyard. It had been 60 years since the days they roamed these grounds, but for a moment it felt like yesterday. The school, located just 37 miles south of Mackay on Queensland's north coast, lay nestled between sprawling brushland and vast cane farms. The rural town of Kumala had seen little change in the years since Donald had left, though he had never strayed far. It was his home, a place of comfort and nostalgia, where the air was thick with memories as well as the scent of sugarcane and salt from the nearby coast. This evening had been long anticipated, and the reunion felt like a gift. For Donald, it was more than just a chance to revisit the past. It was a celebration of the people and the place that had shaped him. As the evening wore on, Donald and his longtime friend Lloyd Younger stood together in conversation, catching up on life and their respective journeys. The air was cool and the setting sun cast long shadows over the lawn where the crowd had gathered. But as the last rays of sunlight faded, an unexpected danger stirred in the undergrowth. Lloyd, the friend of Donald, suddenly felt a sharp sensation on his ankle. At first, he thought it was an insect or a brush from a branch, but when the pressure intensified, he looked down. There, coiled around his leg, was a snake. Its scales shimmered with a beautiful brown-gray hue outlined in dark brown lines. The round, jet-black eyes of the eastern brown snake glinted as it gripped tightly onto his ankle. Donald's heart was shocked as he recognized the creature. The eastern brown snake, one of the deadliest in Australia, was notorious for its speed and venom. Donald wasted no time. He slowly bent down toward the snake, his movements deliberate and calculated. Lloyd was starting to panic, fully aware of the deadly potential of an eastern brown snake, but Donald's calm presence kept him from losing control. Positioning himself carefully, Donald brought his hands around toward the back of the snake, his body low to the ground. His fingers hovered just inches from the coiled reptile, each motion precise and cautious. The dim light of the evening cast long shadows, making it harder to judge the snake's position. With a moment of determination, Donald made his move. But the fading light played tricks on his perception, and the snake spotted his hand before he could act. In an instant, it struck with incredible speed, its head whipping around to sink its fangs into Donald's arm, leaving no time for him to react. The pain was immediate, sharp, and intense. A cry escaped Donald's lips, but despite the searing pain, he didn't let go of the snake. He gripped the long, muscular body, holding it at arm's length. The creature thrashed violently, striking at him again and again, its powerful jaw snapping dangerously close. Donald's body swerved as he avoided each strike, but the snake's accuracy was relentless. Then, just as Donald thought he had managed to distance himself from the threat, the snake caught him once more, this time on his chest. With a final, desperate effort, Donald hurled the snake into the undergrowth, away from the crowd. He paused, breathless, surveying the celebration continuing in the distance. The sound of voices and laughter filled the air, unaware of the danger that had just unfolded on the outskirts of the gathering. As he turned to rejoin the crowd, a strange weakness overtook him. His vision blurred and his legs gave way. He staggered toward Lloyd before collapsing in a heap at his feet. Panic rippled through those nearby as they rushed to his side, desperate to help him. But Donald's chest was already heavy with the weight of the venom spreading through his veins. His breath came in quick, shallow bursts, his body succumbing to the poison coursing through him. Despite the efforts of those around him, CPR, defibrillators, emergency services, the venom worked faster than any intervention. The paramedics worked tirelessly for 30 minutes, but the poison was too strong. Donald's heart gave out. He was gone before the helicopter could even arrive. Lloyd, still shaken and now fearing the worst, was quickly airlifted to McKay Base Hospital. He had received the same bite, but unlike Donald, he had been lucky. The snake, acting more defensively than aggressively, had delivered a dry bite, a rare but not unheard of occurrence. While the snake had left its marks, it had not injected venom into Lloyd, and he was soon treated and released the following day. The anniversary celebration, once filled with joy and laughter, had turned into a scene of chaos and sorrow. The news of Donald's sudden, tragic death spread quickly. He was remembered by all who knew him as the boy who had always had a joke ready, the cheeky one who brought joy to those around him. And now that same infectious spirit was gone, taken by a fate that seemed impossible for such a man to meet. But as the community mourned, a strange truth began to unfold. Donald's body, despite the visible bite marks from the snake, contained no venom. It was a baffling discovery. Eastern brown snakes were notorious for their venomous strikes, but the snake had not injected venom into Donald's body. It was a dry bite, a warning from the snake rather than an attack meant to capture prey. The coroner's report, though incomplete, hinted at something else. It seemed Donald had suffered a cardiac arrest, likely triggered by the fear and stress of the encounter compounded by an underlying health condition. His heart, already fragile, gave out under the strain of the situation. In the end, Donald Morrison's death was not due to the venom of the eastern brown snake, but rather the sudden shock of the encounter. While he had been a victim of the snake's warning, it was his heart that failed him. The community of Kumala lost a beloved man, a friend, a jokester, a part of the fabric that held the town together. As his family grieved, they offered their gratitude to those who had tried to save him. They thanked the medical professionals and the witnesses who had rushed to his side. Donald's death was a reminder of the fragility of life, but also of the deep love he had for his hometown, a place he never left, a place that will remember him forever. It was a warm, quiet afternoon on May 27, 2019 in Brunswick, Georgia, where 62-year-old Priscilla Meredith spent another peaceful day tending to her garden. Originally from West Virginia, she had made Brunswick her home for over 30 years. Known for her love of nature, Priscilla had always admired the vibrant flowers she grew around her house. Over the years, her garden became her sanctuary, a place to unwind and connect with the earth. That morning, Priscilla and her sister were collecting gardening tools and stepping stones in preparation for the coming summer. As they worked, Priscilla moved toward a spot to sit. She didn't notice the timber rattlesnake lying only a few feet away, hidden among the shrubs. Its brown banded body blended seamlessly with the surroundings, making it almost invisible. The snake, coiled and poised, lay in wait. Timber rattlesnakes, native to the eastern United States, are considered one of North America's most dangerous snakes. Growing up to 5 feet long, they can strike with remarkable speed. Their venom is potent, and though anti-venom is highly effective in saving lives, untreated bites can lead to severe damage or death. Although rattlesnakes rarely result in fatalities, they account for thousands of bites each year. In fact, 8,000 people report being bitten annually, but only a handful of those are fatal. Timber rattlesnakes, however, are not aggressive by nature and generally avoid humans, only striking when threatened. But when they do strike, the consequences can be far more devastating than anyone might expect, and Priscilla would learn that truth in the most horrific way possible. As Priscilla lowered herself to the ground to rest, she came within inches of the snake. Without warning, the rattlesnake struck with swift precision. Priscilla felt the sharp pain of the fangs sinking into her skin. The snake quickly retreated, its yellowish-brown body still visible through the shrubs. A tingling sensation spread around the bite site as Priscilla jumped back, heart pounding. Her sister acted quickly, pulling her away from the snake and assessing the injury. Though the bite didn't seem to cause immediate swelling or bruising, the damage had been done. There was a chance the bite could have been dry, as rattlesnakes sometimes strike without releasing venom. However, within moments, Priscilla began to feel the effects of venom entering her bloodstream. Nausea set in and her breathing became labored. Her vision blurred and the tingling sensation spread further from the wound. She knew immediate medical attention was crucial. Her husband Timothy rushed her to Southeast Georgia Health Systems Hospital, about 3 miles away. Upon arrival, an ER doctor examined the bite, but instead of administering anti-venom, consulted with Georgia Poison Control, the standard practice in such cases. The doctor sought guidance on how best to proceed. The advice he received, however, would prove disastrous. The poison control team, upon reviewing the situation, recommended withholding anti-venom since there were no visible signs of swelling or bruising around the bite. The doctor, following protocol, agreed. Though Priscilla continued to feel worsening symptoms, they were told to monitor her condition without immediate treatment. As time passed, the venom rapidly spread through her body. Priscilla's condition deteriorated further, her chest tightened, and her organs began to fail. Her kidneys functioned at less than 30%, and dialysis became a daily necessity. The venom, now affecting her muscles, caused involuntary twitching known as myoclonus, which became increasingly painful. Despite these symptoms, medical staff focused on treating the effects rather than addressing the venom directly. By the time Priscilla went into cardiac arrest, her body was in critical condition. The medical team rushed into action, managing to stabilize her temporarily. She was placed into a medically induced coma and connected to a ventilator. But the damage had already been done. Her kidneys were failing and her body struggled to process the venom. Days passed, then weeks, with no improvement. Priscilla's family remained by her side, but her condition continued to worsen. Her husband Timothy was horrified at the medical staff's failure to administer the life-saving antivenom that could have prevented such suffering. It was clear to him that had the venom been treated properly, Priscilla could have survived. After several weeks of futile treatment, Priscilla passed away. The delay in receiving antivenom had ultimately been the cause of her death. The decision not to administer the medication, despite the unmistakable symptoms of envenomation, had been catastrophic. In the wake of the tragedy, Timothy filed a lawsuit against Southeast Georgia Health System's Brunswick campus, Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, and Emory University, seeking accountability for the medical negligence that led to his wife's death. He named several doctors involved in the case, hoping to find justice for Priscilla's unnecessary suffering and death. The hospital, along with Georgia Poison Control, defended their actions, stating they had followed established protocols. Dr. Mohsen Aklahi, the medical director at Southeast Georgia Health Systems, explained that the poison control team advised against administering antivenom, citing the absence of swelling or bruising as an indication that it might not be necessary. Dr. Gaylord L., managing director at Georgia Poison Control, reiterated that antivenom is only given in about 25% of cases, often withheld until signs of envenomation are clearly present. But for Timothy, this reasoning offered no comfort. The failure to administer antivenom, despite the clear signs of a venomous bite, left him with a profound sense of loss. He couldn't comprehend how such a simple, life-saving treatment could be withheld when it was needed most. It was a quiet morning on August 2, 2012 at William Martin's home in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. Known as Marty to those close to him, William had spent his life immersed in the study of timber rattlesnakes. At 80 years old, he was considered a leading authority in herpetology. His career, built on a deep passion for the venomous snakes of the Bull Run Mountains, had earned him respect across the scientific community. Marty had developed a fascination with snakes as a child. At just 13 years old, while exploring the Bull Run Mountains, he made a remarkable discovery: a population of timber rattlesnakes never before documented. He convinced Dr. Leslie Bearer, a professional herpetologist, to visit the area and confirm his findings. This early encounter ignited a lifelong pursuit. Despite his small stature, Marty's tenacity led him to document snake populations across the globe. In his 20s, he co-founded the Virginia Herpetological Society and earned a degree in biology from the University of South Florida after serving as a paratrooper in Vietnam. Over the years, Marty had encountered many rattlesnake bites. While some were dry, others left their mark. The pain was always searing, spreading from the bite site and weakening his body. But his resilience never faltered. He continued to handle timber rattlesnakes, pushing through the discomfort to further his research. Though rare, venomous snake bites can prove deadly, especially for the very young, the elderly, or those with weakened immune systems. Rattlesnake strikes are fast, capable of traveling 6.5 miles per hour, covering up to 3 feet in the blink of an eye. Despite his knowledge and experience, Marty's luck was about to run out. On that morning in 2012, Marty was at home as he had been countless times before, preparing to handle his pet timber rattlesnake. It was a creature he knew well, having worked with these snakes for decades. As Marty approached the enclosure, the rattlesnake let out a hiss, perhaps a warning. He didn't take it too seriously though. He was used to this routine. But before he could react, the snake lunged. The strike was so rapid that it caught him off guard. In an instant, the snake's fangs sank into his left hand, a bite that would prove to be unlike any other he had experienced. William dropped the snake back into its enclosure, his heart pounding. He quickly assessed the damage. 2 small puncture wounds were visible on his hand with blood trickling out. He knew the feeling too well. The tingling sensation that spread up his arm was a familiar sign. This was no dry bite. The venom was already working its way into his bloodstream, and Marty knew that he needed help immediately. He called out to his wife, Gwen Miller. Although Gwen had seen similar incidents before, this one felt different. It wasn't the typical dry bite she was used to. This seemed much more serious. Without hesitation, she rushed to his side, helping him into the car, and drove straight to the nearest hospital just over 7 miles away. Marty was no stranger to life-threatening situations. He had escaped a Colombian prison, trekked through unforgiving jungles, and faced venomous snakes in remote corners of the world. But this time, what seemed like a simple bite would soon prove to be far more dangerous. As the venom spread, the pain intensified and his body began to weaken. Despite receiving prompt antivenom, the effects were unlike anything he had encountered before. His vision blurred, his chest tightened, and his breathing became labored. Doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize him, but the venom showed no mercy. By the time night fell, Marty's condition had taken a sharp turn for the worse. His family gathered around his bedside, Gwen, his daughters, and close friends, all watching in silence as the man who had dedicated his life to studying and respecting these creatures now struggled to survive against one of them. As the hours passed, his body continued to weaken. By morning, William Martin, a pioneer in herpetology, had passed away. Marty's death was a blow to the herpetological community. He had contributed greatly to the study of rattlesnakes, documenting their population numbers and observing the effects of climate change on their habitats. His groundbreaking research had shaped how scientists understood the species, and his name was respected by those in the field. He had been featured in documentaries, including one with Steve Irwin on the Crocodile Hunter series, where he shared his knowledge of timber rattlers with the world. Yet, in the end, it was a single strike from a snake he had handled countless times before that claimed his life. The news of his death rippled through the community. Tributes poured in, recounting his dedication to studying rattlesnakes, his adventurous spirit, and his refusal to let age slow him down. Even those who had never met him felt the loss, as his contributions had shaped their own work. On a warm evening in July 2019, as the Florida sun began to set over Ocala, Laura Benwick prepared for what would be her final interaction with her beloved reptile collection. The 37-year-old exotic pet enthusiast moved through her modest home, which had long ago been transformed into what she proudly called her serpent sanctuary. Laura had built a reputation among local exotic pet enthusiasts as the woman who could handle anything with scales. Her fascination with reptiles began in childhood when her father, a wildlife biologist, would take her on expeditions into the Everglades. By her 30s, what started as a hobby had evolved into an obsession that consumed her life, her savings, and eventually her marriage. Laura's home housed over 20 snakes ranging from harmless corn snakes to deadly venomous species that required special permits that Laura didn't bother to obtain. Her neighbors had filed numerous complaints about her collection, particularly after 2 separate escape incidents in 2018. Yet she continued to ignore such hazards, and living in a very rural area, no authorities prioritized her neighbors' concerns. On that fateful evening, Laura was preparing to clean the enclosure of her prized possession, a monocled cobra she had illegally purchased through an underground exotic pet network. She'd named him King, and often boasted about his perfect hood pattern and aggressive striking behavior. Her usual snake-handling assistant had canceled at the last minute, but Laura had decided to proceed with the cleaning anyway, skipping her protective gloves since there hadn't been any incident prior to this moment. As Laura opened the enclosure, King was unusually active, swaying back and forth with his hood fully expanded, a warning sign that Laura either missed or chose to ignore. Unlike many snakes that flee from confrontation, the monocled cobra actively stands its ground when threatened, capable of delivering enough neurotoxic venom in a single bite to kill 20 adults. She reached in with a hook to move him to a temporary container, but King was faster. In a flash of movement, the cobra struck, sinking its fangs deep into the flesh between her thumb and index finger. At first, Laura remained calm. She secured King back in his enclosure and called 911. But within minutes, her speech began to slur as the neurotoxins attacked her nervous system. By the time EMTs arrived, Laura was deteriorating rapidly. Without immediate access to the specific anti-venom needed, the medical team could only provide supportive care. Laura died in the intensive care unit just hours after the bite, her body succumbing to respiratory failure as the powerful neurotoxins paralyzed her diaphragm. July 13, 2013 was the kind of day where everything felt sticky and slow in West Monroe, Louisiana. The heat settled low over the town like a lid and the air buzzed with cicadas. Down a gravel road on the edge of town, a ranch house sat behind a gate tangled in kudzu. It looked like it hadn't been lived in for years, but inside it was alive, with something quieter, colder, and far more dangerous. Carl Wessner lived there alone. He was 48, unemployed by all appearances, and rarely left the property. He'd been obsessed with reptiles since childhood, and now, without a family or steady job to distract him, he'd built his entire life around them. The walls of his home were lined with glass tanks, stacked high, looped with cords, lit by buzzing heat lamps. Inside were snakes, ball pythons, boa constrictors, milk snakes, even a few venomous species housed in poorly labeled enclosures. Carl didn't care. He kept meticulous handwritten notes on feeding, humidity, and breeding cycles. His forum posts were long and opinionated, often criticizing new keepers for being too cautious. He saw himself as an expert. Some might have called him reclusive, others obsessive. But to Carl it was simple. He wasn't interested in people. The snakes were enough. The only person who came around regularly was Dennis Felder, a 42-year-old construction worker from nearby Calhoun. Dennis was the kind of guy everyone liked. Steady, good-natured, always ready to lend a hand without making a show of it. He was married with 2 kids, coached Little League in the summer, and still texted old high school friends just to check in. The snakes made him nervous, but he tolerated Carl's odd world mostly out of curiosity, and maybe a bit of sympathy. They'd met at a bar the year before and had fallen into a casual rhythm. Weekend beers, sports on the TV, and long conversations that drifted from life to work to whatever Carl was feeding that week. Carl needed the company. Dennis didn't mind giving it. The visits always followed the same pattern. Carl would eventually start talking about one of the snakes, usually Sadie, his favorite, and press Dennis to hold her. Dennis always laughed it off, but Carl didn't let it go. Over time, the suggestion turned into a challenge. Dennis wasn't reckless, but he hated looking like he was scared of something. Carl knew that, and he leaned into it. Sadie lived in a custom-built enclosure in the corner of the living room. At over 100 pounds, she was Carl's favorite. Burmese pythons aren't venomous, but they are powerful constrictors capable of crushing the life out of prey in seconds. Sadie had a history of reactive behavior. She had once struck at Carl's arm during a tank cleaning and had crushed a broom handle in an escape attempt. But Carl treated those incidents like quirks. He often described her as well-behaved, if a little feisty. That Saturday afternoon, Dennis showed up like usual. The house was hot, the snakes had been fed the day before, and Carl was in a good mood. After some small talk and a couple of beers, he made the suggestion again, one Dennis had heard many times before. But this time, for reasons no one would ever be able to fully explain, Dennis gave in. Carl retrieved Sadie from her enclosure and carefully looped the thick body across Dennis's shoulders, adjusting the tail to keep it balanced. Dennis stood still while Carl stepped back to take a photo, framing the shot in the dim living room light. The python began to shift before the camera clicked. The tightening started almost playfully, barely noticeable at first. Then her body rippled again, tighter this time, pulling inwards across Dennis's chest and upper arms. Carl hesitated, watching for a moment too long, unsure whether Dennis was reacting or overreacting. But Sadie was already tightening further. Her coils crossed over Dennis's upper chest and neck, the full weight of her body anchoring him in place. He tried to lift his arms but couldn't. His legs buckled. By the time Carl dropped the phone and rushed forward, the python's body had locked in completely. Carl grabbed at Sadie's midsection, trying to loosen her hold, but her body was a single muscular loop. She adjusted her grip again, coiling higher, crushing his throat and compressing his ribs with every pulse. Dennis collapsed onto the carpet, flailing once before going still. His eyes rolled back, his lips turned blue. Carl continued to pull at the snake until his own arms began to tremble from the effort. Sadie didn't release him until minutes later, her body slowly unwinding as the struggle faded. Carl froze for several seconds before grabbing his phone with his shaking hands and dialing 911. His voice cracked on the call. He didn't say the word dead, just that his friend wasn't breathing and that a snake had attacked him. The dispatcher told him to remove the animal if possible. He tried, but Sadie was still partially coiled around Dennis's torso, her body loose but unmoving, her tongue flicking lazily at the air. Carl backed off and opened the front door, pacing in tight circles as sirens drew closer. Paramedics arrived within minutes, followed by a sheriff's deputy and animal control. The living room was cramped, humid, and silent except for the hum of the heat lamps and Carl's panicked breathing. One EMT knelt beside Dennis to check for a pulse, while another began the process of freeing what remained of Sadie's grip. She didn't resist. The team moved fast, lifting Dennis onto the floor and initiating chest compressions while an oxygen mask was fitted and IV lines were prepped. They worked through every protocol, but there was no rhythm, no breath. Dennis was pronounced dead at the scene. The coroner's report later confirmed asphyxiation as the primary cause of death, with additional trauma to the trachea and upper cervical vertebrae. His carotid arteries had been compressed within seconds. The damage was survivable only if the pressure had been released almost immediately. But by the time Carl realized what was happening, it was already too late. Public response was swift. Animal control seized over 30 snakes from Carl's home the next morning, including several venomous species he wasn't legally allowed to keep. The enclosures were unstable and poorly labeled, some built from old aquariums or furniture. Sadie was transported to a wildlife facility but euthanized days later due to her size and aggression history. Investigators uncovered an old forum post where Carl had described her as unpredictable, a detail later included in the case file. Though Carl wasn't criminally charged, he was permanently banned from owning exotic animals. The story faded from headlines, but the truth remained. Dennis had never wanted to hold that snake. He only agreed because someone he trusted wouldn't stop asking. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.